For years, Agent Elias Thorne wore the cruel silence of his loss. Though time could not touch his impeccable 007 style, he hadn't felt an honest emotion since that fateful day. The elite young specialist was urgently dispatched to a forgotten safe house, a relic sealed since 1976. But that professional mission quickly became personal. Inside that frozen space, a simple postcard, a hidden locket, and the silent judgment of Moneypenny unlocked a truth greater than any government secret. Lydia wasn't dead. She chose silence so they both could live. If you believe that a love this deep is worth such a profound sacrifice, this story will restore your faith. Comment, Amen, if hope never truly dies. Some men are built from steel, some from stone, but Agent Elias Thorne was forged from 50 years of silence. He was a man carved from granite and Savile Row wool, his appearance that of a timeless gentleman. Tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly swept back, framing a face that rarely betrayed a single flicker of emotion. The only true measure of his age was the deep, weary knowledge held in his piercing gray eyes. He wore the past like a perfectly tailored yet crippling suit. He hadn't felt a raw, honest emotion since 1976, until one simple, weather-beaten postcard changed everything. The sky above Manhattan that late November afternoon was a bruised, metropolitan gray, promising a cold rain that never quite arrived. The city, usually a symphony of sirens and hurried footsteps, seemed muted as Elias stood before the plain wooden door of apartment 9D, nestled in a nondescript, pre-war building in the Upper West Side. This was the target, the safe house 9D. Elias's presence here was a matter of damage control and asset recovery, strictly adhering to the CIA's mandate. Retrieve potentially compromised material linked to foreign intelligence networks before it could be sold to a hostile power. His mission was clinical, but the location was deeply personal. This apartment was where he had once shared a future with Lydia, the woman he had believed lost forever. The door held a large, tarnished wax seal, the official mark of the agency, untouched since the year the lights went out in his life. Elias withdrew a small silver penknife, a gift from Lydia long ago, and delicately broke the hardened wax, a gesture that felt less like a professional entry and more like trespassing on a grave. The moment the lock clicked, a rush of stale, dusty air escaped, smelling faintly of old books and something Elias couldn't name. Perhaps just forgotten love. He stepped inside. The gloom was profound, the only illumination provided by a weak slice of city light struggling through the dust-coated window panes. The dust lay upon every surface, thick and undisturbed, like the snow of forgotten winters. Elias moved slowly, his highly trained senses registering the stillness, the almost painful quiet of a place where time itself had apparently paused. He walked into the dining area. There it was, the precise, heartbreaking scene he had seen countless times in his nightmares. The round wooden table, laid for two. 2 porcelain plates, 2 sterling silver forks, and 2 crystal wine glasses, one with a dried, crimson ring where a glass of red had been left unfinished. One chair was slightly pushed back, as if Lydia had just stepped away. Lydia was, in memory, a vibrant woman of medium height with fiercely bright green eyes and a cascade of unruly dark hair. Her personality had been defined by a deep, almost reckless sense of idealism and an infectious musical laugh that had once anchored Elias's stoic world. She was the wind, and Elias had been the mountain she chose to rest on. Now, seeing the abandoned place setting, the narrative of his life, that she had simply vanished, shattered. He extended a gloved hand and gently touched the back of the chair, lingering for a silent, seismic second. It was during this moment of emotional reckoning that a sound intruded, a soft thump, followed by a delicate, almost haughty meow. Through a cracked pane in the kitchen window, a large, scruffy black cat squeezed its way in. This was Moneypenny, the new arrival. She was a feline of considerable age and girth, her coat patchy, eyes a striking, judgmental amber. She was clearly a veteran of the city's harsh elements, yet she moved with the silent confidence of a true predator. She was not a pet. She was a sovereign. Moneypenny strode purposefully into the dining room, ignored Elias's towering presence and expensive suit entirely, and with the utter disregard of true royalty, hopped directly onto the relic of the dining table, settling down beside the two abandoned plates as if she had guarded them for 5 decades. Elias, the man who controlled geopolitical crises, found himself momentarily defeated, a faint hint of grim amusement touching the corners of his mouth. Elias sighed, accepting the sentinel's vigil. He moved to the small metal mailbox embedded near the front door, the final administrative detail. Inside, beneath a stack of dusty 1976 junk mail, he found it, a single, faded postcard. He pulled it out. It was a simple tourist shot of the city, but the handwritten message on the back, Lydia's familiar script, was clear. He stared at the words, the silence of the room amplifying the single line that pierced the 50 years of icy discipline he had maintained. He read it aloud, his voice rough with disuse. "When the sparrow returns, you will understand." He tracked spies across the globe, navigated the treacherous geometry of Cold War espionage, and lived by the logic of the bullet and the ledger. Yet, after 50 years, Elias Thorne found himself utterly lost to the language of a single, faded postcard. He could decipher encryption, but not the poetry of a loved one. The silence of that locked room spoke louder than any interrogation, whispering not threats, but pain. The sparrow understood every unshed tear, every flicker of regret in the heart of the man of steel. The following morning, Elias Thorne was no longer the sentimental ghost in apartment 9D, but the meticulous analyst. Knowing the strictures against domestic investigation, his pursuit of the sparrow had to adhere to CIA protocols for foreign intelligence linkage. He ignored the postcard's content, the emotional riddle, and focused instead on its physical properties. The paper's unique fiber content, the specific chemical composition of the ink, the faded postmark suggesting a minor, possibly decommissioned, international route, or a small overlooked agency liaison office abroad. He utilized a sophisticated, if cumbersome, $1970-era analysis kit he'd retrieved from a hidden compartment, refusing to contaminate the scene with modern surveillance tech. The initial assessment suggested the paper stock was common in the Mediterranean region, not domestic, justifying his continuing involvement as a matter of foreign asset protection. The trail, however faint, pointed south, leading him away from the concrete labyrinth of Manhattan to the old, humid charm of Charleston, South Carolina, a former transit point for agents moving between the Americas and Europe. Elias arrived in Charleston, swapping his bespoke charcoal suit for a slightly lighter, though equally sharp, navy suit. His investigation led him not to a secure facility, but to the historic Battery District, where the scent of salt and magnolia hung heavy in the air. He was looking for a name whispered in the agency's dusty historical records. Eleanor Vance, a former non-official cover who had assisted with logistical support in the 1970 dollars. He found her not in some shadowy safe house, but tending to a chaotic, vibrant garden overflowing with azaleas. Mrs. Eleanor Vance was a woman sculpted by time. She must have been near 80, her hair a wispy, pure white halo, tied back loosely with a faded silk scarf. Her clothes were comfortable and practical, but her eyes, large, warm, and the color of aged whiskey, held the sharpness of someone who had seen more than a simple gardening life would suggest. Her most defining characteristic was her effortless, gentle humor, and an utter lack of pretense, making her the antithesis of the cold intelligence world Elias inhabited. Elias approached her with the practiced formality of a diplomatic envoy, but Mrs. Vance merely smiled, handed him a well-worn trowel, and asked if he preferred iced tea or lemonade. "You look like a man who has forgotten how to sit still, young man," she observed, her voice gravelly but kind. Elias inquired about Lydia, carefully avoiding any agency jargon. Mrs. Vance's face softened at the mention of the name. She did not know Lydia the agent, but she knew Lydia the spirit. "Lydia wasn't a woman, dear. She was the wind. She couldn't be caught, but she could be felt by everyone," she said, her description dripping with the poetic quality of a mythological chronicler. She recalled Lydia's deep, almost radical joy and her unwavering faith in freedom. This was the spiritual decryption Elias needed, far more valuable than any chemical analysis. Their conversation, however, was immediately compromised by the unexpected arrival of Moneypenny, the black cat from New York. Having stowed away in Elias's meticulously packed vintage attaché case, or perhaps simply chosen to follow the source of his profound existential dread, she sauntered onto Mrs. Vance's porch with an air of superior entitlement. She leaped onto the antique wicker table, nearly sending a pitcher of iced tea crashing. Elias, attempting to retrieve his feline shadow with the practiced precision he might use to defuse a small explosive, failed miserably. Mrs. Vance simply chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "That cat knows who needs a good humbling, darling. She's a four-legged psychologist." The unexpected, frustrating humor served as a necessary counterpoint to the deadly seriousness of Elias's mission. Elias managed to guide the conversation back to Lydia's final days, subtly pressing for anything related to the sparrow. Mrs. Vance paused, her gaze distant. She then reached into the neck of her dress and pulled out a delicate, worn silver locket, shaped precisely like a small bird in flight. "She gave me this, right before she left. Said it was the symbol of everything that could never be caged. Not the spirit, not the truth, and certainly not love." Elias's breath hitched. He realized that this locket was the physical key, the object that Lydia had used to connect her past mission to his present recovery. He recognized the craftsmanship. It was not mere jewelry, but likely contained a hidden mechanism or code. The locket was not just a memory, it was the next step in his duty to retrieve the CIA's most vital asset. The silver locket, shaped like a tiny bird in mid-flight, felt cold and heavy in Elias Thorne's hand as he flew back to Manhattan. The warmth of Mrs. Vance's porch and the absurd humor of Moneypenny's companionship were stripped away, replaced by the rigid gray reality of Safe House 9D. He was no longer tracing foreign paper stocks. He was holding the key to his own damnation. He used the penknife once more, not to break a seal, but to meticulously pry up a loose floorboard in the bedroom, a detail only Lydia, with her obsession for hiding things in plain sight, would have conceived. Beneath it rested a small, dark wooden box, antique and unmarked, bound by an elaborate brass lock. It was too small for any large weapon or complex encryption device. It was clearly a vessel for something profoundly intimate or profoundly dangerous. He placed the locket gently into the corresponding recess on the lock mechanism. The miniature sparrow fit perfectly, and with a soft mechanical clink, a sound that echoed the finality of a closing door, the box sprang open. Inside, nestled on old velvet, lay two items: a tightly rolled cylinder of microfilm and a single, folded letter. The microfilm first. Elias, the professional, handled it with surgical gloves, his eyes scanning the minuscule data strips through a portable viewer. The contents confirmed his worst fears and simultaneously his professional duty. It contained the complete operational details of Operation Phoenix, a deep-cover CIA network spanning the Mediterranean and directly compromised by the traitorous activity of Senator Evelyn Hale. Hale, the villain of the piece, was a woman of formidable political stature, a towering figure in her late 50s, impeccably groomed with a ruthless gaze and a chillingly calm demeanor known for her ability to command deference. Her betrayal was not ideological, but purely financial, selling the lives of American assets abroad for monumental personal gain. Elias had his prize, and his mission, asset recovery, was complete. But then came the second item, the letter. He unfolded the brittle paper, his surgical detachment finally failing him as he recognized Lydia's elegant hand. He discarded the gloves. He read the words as the silence of the apartment pressed in, the mythological tone of the narrative shifting violently into raw, visceral emotion. The letter explained everything. Lydia, working deep within the agency, had discovered Hale's treason. She knew if the microfilm fell into Hale's hands, the Phoenix network would be annihilated, but she also knew that taking the evidence to a corrupt director at CIA headquarters would risk her life, and critically, Elias's life. "Forgive the distance, my dearest Elias," the letter read. "I sealed our memories here, where they would be safe from the world and from you. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because the only way to save you was to make you believe I was already gone." Elias, the man who had faced death countless times with stoic reserve, finally broke. The sheer, colossal weight of her sacrifice, a life chosen for oblivion, a love sealed away for half a century, crushed the steel facade he had worn. He realized his life had been built on a tragic, necessary lie. The grief wasn't just about loss, it was about redemption. Lydia hadn't abandoned him. She had made herself a martyr for their love and for the sake of the agency's assets abroad. This realization was the true essence of the justice and redemption hook. The personal truth was intertwined with the professional betrayal. Elias needed clarity, and he reached out to his most trusted living contact, Director William Bill Sterling. Bill was an old-school CIA veteran, a man nearing retirement with a perpetually tired face and a reputation for incorruptibility, the only man Elias trusted to see the mission through justly. Elias reported the successful asset recovery, the microfilm, and, crucially, presented the evidence of Hale's treason, explicitly identifying it as a matter for domestic law enforcement, the FBI, due to the statutory limitations of the CIA. He did not mention the letter. That was his truth alone. Bill Sterling's voice, though weary, crackled with immediate resolve, confirming that the FBI would be alerted. Elias had completed his duty, but he was not yet free. He had to lay the trap for Hale, a final meticulous act of professional service, before he could pursue the man he once was. The greatest tale is not about how the mighty fall, but how the meek rise. Senator Evelyn Hale, draped in the arrogance of power, believed she had outsmarted every agency, every protocol, every moral law. Yet her defeat would come not at the hands of a superior force, but through the careful, quiet diligence of a grieving man, the sudden, hilarious intervention of a disobedient cat, and the watchful eyes of an elderly woman. He was just a disillusioned agent. She was just a historian of the streets. But together they would prove that the true heroes are often the ones the world never expects. Elias Thorne, armed with the microfilm and the crushing emotional weight of Lydia's letter, knew his final act of professional duty had to be flawless. He had secured the CIA's foreign intelligence asset, the microfilm, but the domestic criminal, Senator Hale, still walked free. The CIA could not apprehend her, but the FBI could. Elias coordinated the operation with Director Bill Sterling, agreeing on a precise handoff location, a neglected, echoing pier jutting into the industrial harbor of Charleston, a location chosen for its sparse lighting and convenient adjacency to both the water and the shadows. Elias, in his customary bespoke attire, stood as the bait, the solitary figure of wealth against the backdrop of rust and brine. He had fabricated a cover story, an initial exchange to prove the microfilm's existence, with the promise of delivering the full asset in exchange for a hefty sum of laundered money. The senator arrived exactly at the arranged time, pulling up in a black armored sedan. Senator Evelyn Hale was a striking figure, even in the dim light. She was tall, with sharp, almost chiseled features, wearing an expensive, tailored pantsuit that screamed authority. Her movements were always economical and precise, reflecting a mind that calculated every advantage. Her eyes, pale and intensely focused, gave nothing away, yet held the icy self-assurance of someone who had consistently put personal ambition above human life. She was accompanied by 2 private security personnel, Marcus, a brute of a man with oversized shoulders and dull eyes, and Jenna, lean and wary, whose constant nervous energy suggested true operational experience. Hale approached Elias, flanked by her 2 silent sentinels, her voice a low, confident purr. "Agent Thorne, you clean up nicely for a man delivering treason." The exchange was short-lived. Once Hale confirmed the microfilm's legitimacy, she signaled her guards to terminate Elias and secure the asset. This was the moment Elias had been waiting for. He reacted not with brute force, but with the elegant, economical precision of a Cold War master. Utilizing the heavy mooring lines coiled nearby, a classic $1,007 improvisation, he first tripped Marcus, sending the bulky guard sprawling into a stack of industrial crates. Before Jenna could draw her weapon, Elias used the distraction to fling a handful of harbor, gravel into her eyes, blinding her temporarily. His objective was containment, not neutralization. He was buying time for the FBI. Just as Hale lunged for the microfilm, seizing the moment of confusion, a low, familiar meow cut through the harbor noise. Moneypenny, having followed Elias once again, appeared suddenly from beneath a nearby crate. The ancient cat, seemingly annoyed by the sudden loud movements, walked directly into Jenna's path, causing her to lose balance and crash heavily. Seconds later, headlights flooded the pier. Unmarked black vehicles screeched to a halt. The FBI tactical unit, having tracked the signal Elias had provided, swarmed the area. Agent Thomas Reed, the lead FBI officer, a serious man in his mid-40s with a clean-shaven head and a perpetually strained expression, took charge immediately, cuffing a furious Senator Hale. Elias, utterly detached from the domestic legal proceedings, simply handed the microfilm to Agent Reed, completing his CIA asset recovery mission. His professional duty was done. He watched as the federal agents escorted the senator away, the betrayal finally contained. Just as the chaos subsided, a smaller, older sedan pulled up. Mrs. Eleanor Vance emerged, wearing a sensible raincoat and carrying her omnipresent gardening basket. She surveyed the scene, the defeated senator, the FBI, the disheveled Elias, and merely frowned. "Honestly, young man," she called out, shaking her head. "Such unnecessary commotion on a Tuesday. Some people simply lack decorum." After the FBI departed, she walked directly up to Elias, ignoring the blood and the police tape, and handed him a carefully folded slip of paper, which she retrieved from her basket. "Lydia didn't die, Elias," she said softly, her whiskey eyes holding profound conviction. "She found peace where only the truly lost can. Go find the sparrow's true sanctuary. This is where she is." The note contained a single, handwritten address: St. Anna's Monastery, Greece. The world had taught Elias Thorne to trust only the measurable, the verifiable, the cold, hard logic of espionage. He believed in evidence, not hope. But if you believe that faith can move mountains, and that time is merely a concept suspended by the strength of an enduring promise, then this story will restore your belief in the greatest miracle of all, the miracle of a love that never truly leaves. With Senator Hale contained and the microfilm secured, Elias's professional duty was complete. The tailored charcoal suit, the symbol of his half-century of disciplined sorrow, felt suddenly like a costume he was desperate to shed. The address Mrs. Vance had provided, St. Anna's Monastery, Greece, was less a destination and more a call to pilgrimage. He did not notify the agency, Having already spoken to Director Sterling, he trusted his superior to file the appropriate retirement papers, confirming his final duty was to himself and to the woman who had sacrificed everything. He booked the first flight, not as Agent Thorne, but as Elias, a man pursuing a truth far older than any government. Surprisingly, Moneypenny, the ancient black cat, insisted on accompanying him. She sat curled on his travel bag, demanding passage with the haughty imperiousness of a stowaway queen. Elias, having long abandoned logic where this creature was concerned, arranged for the necessary and ludicrously expensive international transit papers. The cat, the true constant in his latest journey, was going to Greece. The monastery of St. Anna stood perched on a sheer cliff face overlooking the deep, brilliant azure of the Aegean Sea. The air was clean, scented with thyme and salt, a stark, restorative contrast to the dust of Safe House 9D. The architecture was starkly beautiful, built from sun-bleached stone, radiating an ancient, quiet peace. Elias climbed the winding stone steps, the locket burning a small, hopeful circle against the silk of his shirt. He paused briefly at the entrance to the main courtyard, observing the scene. He found a secluded area where the light was soft and the only sound was the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the waves below. And there she was. She was older now, of course, a woman sculpted by 50 years of choice. Lydia still retained the familiar height and posture, but her once unruly hair was now a serene shock of white, tied back simply. Her skin was lined by sun and time, yet those fierce, bright green eyes, the same eyes that had once anchored his soul, were utterly unchanged, holding the same deep, radical kindness. She wore simple, traditional Mediterranean clothing, her hands busy scattering seeds to a swirling cloud of birds. The small birds were everywhere, tiny, quick, and utterly free. Sparrows. She was talking to them softly in a low, musical murmur. Elias stood still, watching her, afraid to break the spell. After a long moment, she looked up, her gaze locking with his. There was no surprise, no shock, only the deep, boundless recognition of an ancient connection. She smiled, a profound, weary joy breaking across her face. "I always knew you would follow the song, Elias," she said, her voice softer, but still carrying the old melody. Elias finally walked toward her, the decades collapsing into a single step. He spoke the words he had carried for half a century. "I came for the sparrow." She reached out and took his hand, the contact immediate and comforting. This was the moment of redemption he had sought. "I sealed our memories in that room not to forget them, my dearest Elias," she explained, her thumb tracing the lines on his palm. "I left because the only way to save you, to protect you from the rot hail brought into the agency, was to make you believe I was already gone. I chose the silence so we could both live." The realization struck Elias with the force of a revelation. Her loss was the purest form of love, a deliberate, magnificent sacrifice. He finally understood that love was not about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go so the other may fly free. Elias looked out over the sea. He had one final act left to perform for the man he used to be. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and undid the knot of his elegant silk tie, the last vestige of the agency, the final piece of the costume. He removed it, and then, with a profound sense of release, he cast it out over the cliff edge into the Aegean Sea. The man who had been defined by duty, protocol, and silence was finally relinquishing his role. A small black streak of fur suddenly bounded up the steps. Moneypenny, who had apparently observed the entire scene with professional detachment, now jumped onto Elias's shoulder, demanding immediate attention. Lydia laughed, her old musical laugh echoing across the courtyard. They were free, beginning a life of quiet companionship. The greatest tale was complete.